Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon, Leo. How are you?
Good to you?
Good, thank you. Good to see.
Hi, Bob.
Hello, Garrett. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good to see you.
You too. Sorry, I realized I had copied the link that was to the calendar, but
Oh,
I
my
kept
goodness.
clicking on it and it kept just adding another event to my calendar.
Oh, no. Wow.
I'm glad I figured it out.
Yeah.
I like your background.
Well, thank you. I thought you would. Yeah.
You're sitting in front of the original, right?
That's it. Yeah. Actually, this is, I think, might be the one from the MHS because it has red lines in it because it was one they was updated at some point. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's everyone, well, not everyone, but there are a lot of states of that map. And ours is not. Ours is, well, we have a couple of states, but one of them is a unique state that's only.
Really?
Oh, yeah. How are things?
Everything is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. Yeah. How about with you?
Yeah, good. So you're sometimes in person?
Yeah, this class
Yeah.
usually is in person, but because of the snow today, I
Mhm.
decided to make it a virtual class. So, yeah, but this group has been very diligently coming in, and I have another class just before it also that is usually in person. So, but usually with this class, I like to go places, but we can't do that this semester. So it's
Yeah.
been more in class than it usually is.
Yeah. Thank goodness, the thought of having people in the same room is
I
so
know. Yeah.
exotic.
It really is. Yeah. It's yeah. I mean, things have changed so much in the last, year. So,
Mhm.
so yeah. Yeah. So, let me just try to make you a co-host so you can
Great.
share your screen.
Super. Looks like let's just test it out.
One sec, I haven't yet done that.
Oh,
Oh,
well,
you're doing it. You're doing
looks
it.
like
Wow,
I can share my screen now.
That's great.
Whether I'm
That's
honest or not. And will you be able? I made or I have a plan for 3 breakout rooms. Is it easy for you to divide up a group into thirds? Great.
Yeah, that's easy. Yeah.
Great. Super.
Good. So I think just about everyone is here, so we might as well get started. Does anyone have any questions for me before we begin? It's good to see everyone virtually. It's different than being in the classroom. Anyone have any questions, any problems, issues? Okay, good to see you. And so we are fortunate today to have with us Garrett Nelson Dash, who is the curator at the, is that your title, curator, or do you do something else at the Leventhal Map Center, which is at the Boston Public Library? And the, I know he'll be telling us more about the Leventhal Map Center and about the BPL, which we will have someone from the BPL talking to us in a week or two. But it's really great to have you with us to talk about this tremendous collection of maps, not only of Boston, but of lots of other places. So you can take it away.
Great. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for everybody to have as we go through today. But thanks, Professor Allison, for having me here. I am actually, my full and very clumsy title is Curator of Maps and Director of Geographic Scholarship at the Leventhal Map and Education Center at the Boston Public Library. Which I don't say because I want you to address me correctly, but actually to kind of foreshadow some of the themes today, which is we are not just a collection of old maps. We are a center that cares a lot about the relationship between maps and geography and history and studies of the city and the state. We think of maps not as dusty old documents to look at as just kind of curiosities, but instead as really rich historical artifacts that kind of change the way we think about not only history, but the places that we live in, the relationship of people to one another across space. And if there's one thing that I hopefully can convince you of by the end of this hour, it's that we should treat maps, or you should treat maps, not just as kind of pretty illustrations, but instead as these really complicated, rich documents that open up all sorts of interesting questions, difficult questions, complicated questions, not all of which can be answered by the map itself. So maps are useful for changing your kind of attitude to questions about history as much as they are for just answering questions that you got elsewhere. So I'm kind of going to try to teach you to think like geographers over the course of the hour. And we're going to do that interactively. We're going to do it by looking at some maps in our collection. The kind of structure of today is we're going to talk through a couple of maps of Boston. We're going to do a little breakout exercise thinking about how to critically interpret some maps. And then I'll close with explaining some of our resources at the Map Center that you can use even now when the building sadly is closed and you can't come to visit us. I'll also say I've had visits in the past from Professor Allison's class in person. We love to have students visit us. We are located in the Central Library in Copley Square. We're free to the public. You can come and request maps from the 16th century and we will show them to you and you can touch them and look at them. So please do whenever we open again, which unfortunately I don't know when that will be, but it won't be forever that we're closed. So today I'm going to focus on resources that are still available digitally and available during our closure. But reminder, we are down the street and we'd love to see you at some point, whether it's as a student or a researcher or just as somebody who's interested in cool stuff in libraries. I dropped this link, this shared link into the chat. Were people able to open it okay? I always get double check that I shared it correctly. The reason I'm sharing that is because I'll do a little bit of screen sharing today, but I also want you all to be able to access the digital collections pages. Maps are really detailed. They reward zooming in and getting close down into the images. And you can't do that when you're just looking at my screen. So this document has some links to our digital collections page where you can actually zoom around and explore the maps yourselves. What I like to do at the beginning of these exercises is something that I call close looking. And what I mean by that is to think about maps, not just as these kind of like, oh, that's a picture of Boston. I could use that just to generally illustrate Boston. But instead to think about these maps as material objects, as things that have a place and time of their own, as documents that capture like an almost mind-blowing enormity of information in a single image, and that reveal both the biases of the people who are making them And also in what they show and in what they don't show, invite us to kind of think more carefully about how people are related to places, how places are related to the environment, and to tease out some of these geographical connections. So what you're looking at here is the digital collections page. This is the same link you'll get to if you click in the first Boston 1899 map in the close looking exercise in the document I shared with you. What I'm going to do is give everybody about 2 minutes, and then we're going to go around and I'm going to call on every single one of you and ask you to say one thing that you see in this map. And the caveat is you do not need to pick some sort of like brilliant, like, oh, I figured out the whole history of Boston from something that I saw. It's totally fine. And I would even encourage you to pick things that are obvious, like this map is rectangular, or this map has the word Boston on the bottom of it. Those are like totally legitimate and actually very interesting observations about a map that, that help us to ask questions about it. So when you're on this collections page, you can click the map and you'll get this zoomable version, and you can zoom so close that you can actually see sort of the folds in the paper here. We take really good photographs of our maps so that you can get down into the details. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to invite you all to click through. If you're having trouble, raise your hand or drop a note in the chat, but you should be able to click this link that I put in the chat and then click the first link in that. It says Boston 1899. And in 2 minutes, we'll start going around the Zoom. This is especially fun when you all can be around a table. This is this particular map is a very large one. We have magnifying glasses at the Map Center. It's a lot of fun to see these objects in person, but we're doing the best we can in virtual space.
Do they have an idea of when it's going to be open to the public again?
We don't really know, unfortunately, because we're part of the city government. There's all sorts of like decisions about the schools and everything are like part of that. So my best guess is it will be over the summer, but that's just a guess. It's not based on any information. But the BPL has been around for more than 150 years, so it will be around for at least another 150. All right, take like another 30 seconds or so and pick out what your observation is going to be. Again, it's really okay if it's something that seems blindingly obvious. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again so that we can look at it as we talk. Get the zoomed in version here, and I'm just going to go down the participants list. I apologize in advance if I get any of your name pronunciations wrong. I'll try my best. So first up on my list is Sana Kim.
Hi, I wanted to actually go first. I think I see a lot of boats or ships or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I see a lot of that. What's up with that?
Cool. All right, we're going to come around and think about as many of these questions as we can at the end. But great, so something that you noticed, and like maybe partly noticed it because it seems a little out of the ordinary of what you kind of expect to see on a map.
Yeah.
Ahad?
Yeah. Like actually, I'm curious why it's like an island, like on the, on the center, and there's like a lot of lands around it. So that's why.
Great. Yeah, I see a lot of water ringing this whole area, making it look nearly island-like. Yeah, great. Amber?
I've noticed that there's like, when you zoom in on like the factories or like the buildings, there's like smoke coming out of the towers.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a bit detailed from like maps I've seen before.
Yeah, Yeah, there's a ton of illustrative detail. Somebody spent a lot of time making this map. Amelie?
I noticed that there's lots of bridges. I never really knew there was that many.
Great, yeah. A lot of observations on the relationship between land and water so far. That's really awesome. Emma?
I noticed a lot of like ports along the water, probably for trade or something.
Yeah, great. And they're named too. They're labeled. Most of them are. Erica?
I immediately noticed a big green patch, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute! That's the park in Downtown Crossing, and that's where like the Suffolk campus is. There's 73 Tremont and Sargent, and Tremont Street."
Awesome. So you're finding things that you recognize.
Yeah.
That's oftentimes a very important way of orienting oneself to a map, is to pick out things that correspond with this kind of reality you know. Gianfranco?
What I kind of noticed is the year is 1899, so this is like very like post-industrial revolution, and so that's why you'd think that there's a bunch of smokestacks and all that.
Great. Yeah, really, time is really important in a map, right? It helps us situate like what era we're looking at, what sorts of features in the city are, how it fits together with what we know about urban history. Hannah?
So the first thing I noticed was the tear, like in the middle of the map. It almost looks like it was like folded in half.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. I love it when people notice material things about this map, because this is, of course, a photograph of a map that physically is in our collections. So it's a reminder that even though you're in digital space, you are seeing something that's real in that sense. It's material. Henry?
Yeah, I could be wrong, but it looks like the State House is a little different than it is now.
Cool, yeah. So comparing like change over time, we already noticed that it's 1899. That's what, 122 years ago now. So comparing not only what you recognize, but also what is less recognizable, to think about change and transformation. Jack?
Something cool that I noticed was that, I mean, like the Cambridge area and pretty much anywhere outside of Boston has a lot of green, a lot of like farmland, which doesn't look anything like it does now.
Yeah, great. And the periphery of this map actually has a lot of detail. And it's a place where you notice quite a bit of difference from today's city. Kathleen?
I noticed around like 6 to 8 bridges in the back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a ton of bridges. Crossing the Charles, crossing the Mystic, crossing the Inner Harbor. A lot of them. And they're kind of a mishmash too. They're like almost overlapping one another. Where did we leave off? Lily?
I noticed all the street names in the water in the front.
Yeah, so some of these streets are named. There's Charter Street. Here's Richmond Street, State Street, Atlantic Ave. Some of which you maybe recognize if you know Boston. Logan?
I noticed my dorm, the Ames building, and I noticed that there's a number 13 on it.
Well, I don't know. So I know Suffolk is in here somewhere. I don't know exactly where 13 is. So
if you look at the old State House, it's like right
yeah.
behind the old State House.
Got it.
Find that in the middle.
Let's see, where's 13?
It took me a second to find it.
You're somewhere in here. Anyways,
Yeah,
the general, there it is, 13. I see it. Right here.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Does it look like your dorm today?
Yeah, the outside. That's how I was able to notice it, because I think this building was built in 1889, so it would be 10 years old in this map. And it looks
Cool.
almost the same, the outside.
Cool, awesome. Where did we leave off? Seth is next.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, but also there are 16 things that are numbered around pretty much the same area of downtown Boston, and they go down there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a label, 16. If you had to pick 16 important things, which would you pick? Would they be these 16 things? Shihao?
Yeah.
You there, Shihao?
Yeah, I don't know what to say.
How about we'll make a really perhaps obvious thing. What's the label on this? Nobody's said it yet. It's Boston, right? Which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the city of Boston. We see Cambridge. Somebody already pointed out Cambridge. Somebody pointed out Rivers. So the way that a word like Boston attaches to the geography that we're seeing is actually more complicated than maybe it seems at first. Cool. These are all really, really great observations, and they suggest some of the ways that this map kind of metaphorically unfolds to us, right? We're seeing a map of Boston in 1899, which leads us to think that this is maybe like a snapshot of the city at one instant in time. One of the things that maps kind of trick us into thinking is that they freeze history into an instant. There's some reasons why we probably have some clues that that's maybe not the case. First is that somebody probably didn't exactly document the positions of all of these various ships, which notice are actually ships of very different technology eras. You've got sailing ships, you've got early battled destroyers, like the Great White Fleet here. You've got steam cruisers, paddle wheels. So, it's not like this represents an immediate instant in time. Instead, this is kind of a generalized picture of Boston at the end of the 19th century. And the way that it's generalized tells us a lot about what somebody who made a map like this would have considered to be important and unimportant. And that's one of the key kind of ways of thinking about what a map is representing, is that any kind of map is going to make the world more simple than it really is. The only real geography is the world itself. And you can't capture the whole world itself on a map. You have to make it simpler. And so what gets simplified, what gets left out, what gets included, and how it gets shown reveal really important things about what the map maker thought was important, and more broadly, what the kind of cultural world at this time thought was important. So clearly showing a busy harbor was important to establish Boston's presence in the maritime world. Smokestacks. Today, you probably wouldn't want to emphasize that your city is full of smokestacks and smoke, but in 1899, that was really cool, right? It was Boston wanted to brag about the fact that it had an industry. Talked about these bridges. Look at the number of rail lines and heavy infrastructure that are coming into Boston on all sides. This is where today's North Station is. You can see this crazy mess of rail lines going out this way, off into the distance, rail yards. So many rail yards here that the illustrator couldn't even draw them all. Down here is South Station, or what is today's South Station. Same thing, crazy messes of rail lines. This is a city that's deeply connected to the world outside of it, both by sea, by land, by rail. And you can see some of the effects of that on the 19th century city. So you can see in places like the West End, just right here, things like tenement houses, the effects of 19th century immigration and industrialization on the city. You can see the way that the city was taking its historic core. So somebody mentioned that it looked like an island, and Boston was once almost an island, which we'll see in later maps. Boston before European colonization was very nearly an island. It's a very narrow peninsula that connected it to land. So you can see, even from a zoomed out perspective, the places on this map where there are windy, twisty, kind of European looking streets, That's Boston's historic core. And other places, this is the Back Bay, see these gridded landscape, a lot of grand civic buildings like churches. The BPL is right here, numbered 4. Things that you don't see in the tenement districts. This is an example of how the city was trying to project a kind of elite rule, or the presence of its historic elite. Cultural institutions like the library, expensive dwellings like the row houses in Back Bay. You can see a city on the verge of transformation and also changing its relationship to its region. Somebody mentioned Cambridge and the horizon. See smokestacks extending out into the countryside, but also this, what today seems like very green, very verdant, almost agricultural landscape. At the turn of the century, the city's kind of reaching out into the country. And that's one of the things that's one of the historical features that gives us modern day environmentalism, as people started to worry about what was happening as trains and factories spread out into previously agricultural land. Of course, it wasn't always agricultural land. Notice one thing that's nowhere on this map is the presence of American Indian populations. This is a city that is on the move and industrializing and changing quickly. And that has essentially the map maker, and this would have been true for essentially any white Bostonian of 1899, had kind of forgotten the people that they had committed a genocide against and pushed off of the land. So it's retained in certain things like place names, but the removal of people who were living in this area only a few hundred years before is also really noteworthy. 100 years is not that much time in the long scope of history. The map also invites us to think about why the city we live in today looks the way it does. I'm really glad some of you noticed like a building, is it Ames Hall? Sorry, I don't know the Suffolk campus super well, but this building is still here, right? In many ways, we're still living in the city that was built at this time. So to use just one example, all of these crazy, crazy rail yards that were needed to bring things like lumber and milk and food into the city. We don't use rail for those purposes anymore, not nearly as intensively. Any guesses what this is today? Who knows Boston well? What do you do with a bunch of empty rail yards if you're in, let's say, the 1950s?
Is that the Mass Pike?
Close. This is I-93. So this is the Zakim Bridge, the famous like illuminated bridge that comes into Boston. You see it on postcards. That's basically right here right now. And so the Zakim Bridge, very modern, part of like Boston's 21st century history. It is where it is, and it's designed where it is because of decisions that were made in 1899 and earlier. And those decisions in turn structure things like questions about inequality, environmental justice. There's fights going on right now in East Boston, which you see here, and Chelsea, about how those areas are relatively disadvantaged in terms of transit. They get lots of tailpipe pollution from cars. So you want to answer the question, like, why do communities in Chelsea and East Boston face those kind of difficulties? You can kind of see why on this map that's over 100 years old, right? The way the geography is structured, where things are, where people live, where they move around, where infrastructure is built, how elite neighborhoods like Back Bay get separated out from places like the West End or like East Boston. Those are all stories that are still very much with us today. I could like keep going on and on. I could probably talk for 3 hours about this map alone. It's so interesting and so detailed, but it's true of most, if not all, of the maps in our collection. So I'm going to show you a couple of maps that kind of trace a big, very rough historical geography of Boston. And then we're going to do a breakout group where I want you to all do a similar close looking exercise at 3 different maps. The first map I want to show you is this one. Now, oftentimes, like we said, where the like best thing to do is to orient a historic map according to what you know. This is a map of Boston, but it looks really, really different. If you just pulled up a Google map of Boston, it would be really hard to tell, like, okay, I see what goes where. There are a few features on this map that match the Boston we know today. Can anybody tell you're looking at my screen, so it's harder, but anybody see anything that they recognize?
Boston Common.
Great, and we can tell because it's got a nice
Yeah.
big label on it, right? And we still know where the Common is. We think about Boston Common as like in the dead center of the city, right? Like it's a pretty important landmark. It's like the heart of the city, geographically and sort of like emotionally too, right? You can see here the Boston Common was actually like on the edge of the 18th century city. This is one of the most important early maps of Boston. Notice I'm using the term early, again, in a way that obscures pre-European settlement in Boston. We have very few, essentially no existent maps of Boston before European colonization. And that's not because indigenous people didn't make maps or didn't have a sense of geography, but it's a complicated story about colonization, destroying indigenous civilizations, wiping them off of the land, destroying most of their records, and having a stake in pretending like those people never existed, right? If you want to sell land and establish a new town and get colonists to come over from England, you're not likely to show a map that says, here's all the people who already lived here, right? So when I talk about early Boston, I'm using that in a way that is actually wrong, right? 1722 is not early Boston. 1722 is fairly late in Boston's history. But it is the period where we start having recorded maps. And that absence runs through many, many of the maps in our collection. So back to the Common. It's on the edge of this map. And this map shows that Boston as a peninsula, the actual technical geographic term for what it is a tombolo, an island that's connected to the land by a little spit, sandy spit. That sandy spit here is labeled as Orange Street. This is Washington Street today. So if you were to go down into the South End and follow Washington Street, you'd be walking along the original spit of land that connected Boston to Roxbury. And you can see here how this kind of colonial center grew very much around the port, the harbor. England was really important to Boston because it couldn't have survived without maritime trade back to Europe. And you can see things going on here like Long Wharf, which extended all the way out into the harbor, got longer and longer as it needed to service ships that demanded deeper and deeper water. You can see all the other wharfs here. There's actually a whole story about how the Boston Harbor was slowly filled by the creation of this marine infrastructure, like barricades. And so you see a city that's already transforming. This mill pond, this is close to where North Station is today. If you look on a modern map of Boston, you'll actually see that there's like a grid of streets just, I guess, south of North Station. And that's because this area wasn't filled in until much, much later. So this kind of crazy winding street network took a long time to get developed. So comparing a map like this one to today tells us an obviously kind of dramatic story about urban change in the city. It's very different from what we see in this map. This map is from the 1770s. It's actually a 1780 revision of a map that was originally produced in the 1770s. And if you take a close look at it, here's Boston. There's that same Boston neck, so Washington Street today. Here's the Common, empty space on the edge of the city. If this is the Common, can anybody guess orientation-wise, like where Copley Square is? Which direction would I have to move my mouse from here, the Common? I don't know how well you all know Boston yet, but.
I don't know. I used to live there, so I'm like trying to look. Would it be, where's the Common right there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
This is Tremont Street coming up
Oh,
here.
so it would be straight like to the kind of upwards, or that's Tremont Street to the left. I don't know.
So Copley Square is basically right here. Yeah. Copley Square is in Back Bay, right? Where did the term Back Bay come from? it came from the fact that Boston expanded into these mudflats that were all around the city. And most of Boston lies on land that didn't exist in the 1770s. So you can see, like, here's Cambridge, that's Harvard Square right here. This is Charlestown. This is South Boston. And that looks very different from the modern city that is filled in essentially all around here. Now, thinking again about why a map was created, like this map is interesting because it shows us just how dramatically Boston has changed. You can see from a zoomed out perspective how it's like this little city sticking out into the harbor. And this map's super detailed about the harbor. All of these little numbers here are what we call soundings, they're depths. These lines that trace from like the points of islands out to shoals are lines of sight. And there's a ton of detail around the coastline. Not so much detail as you get farther away from the coastline. So like this is up into what's Cambridge and Somerville today. It's kind of just like guesswork. There's not a lot of detailed, accurate perspective here. What do you think that all tells you about when this map was made? First, it's really accurate. Second of all, it focuses a lot on the harbor and the coast. It's not particularly detailed inland. And I'll remind you by context, to produce a map of this kind of accuracy in the 1770s is really difficult. It's like the, Google or Manhattan Project, or like imagine the most technically sophisticated thing of our time. Who do you think would have made a map like that? Who or what institution would have needed to know a lot about Boston Harbor in the 1770s?
Shipping or like trade via water?
Definitely via water. Merchants are rich at this time, so they do have a lot of resources, but who has even more resources and who cares a ton? Remember the time period, 1770s, who cares a lot about Boston Harbor?
British Empire.
Exactly. So this whole series of maps, and we have maps like this that stretch all the way from Canada down the East Coast. These were like the top secret, incredible maps of the British Navy at the time. They're part of a series called the Atlantic Neptune. And the amount of scientific knowledge, the amount of training that was needed to produce a map like this. Again, you didn't just like log into Google Maps to figure out how to sail your warship into Boston Harbor. You needed to physically have something like this on hand. And you can actually see how, a map like this coming from the 1770s and 1780s has worn over time. This map was actually accompanied by this, which doesn't look like a map, but it's a good reminder that we have a lot of geographic things that aren't necessarily map-like. So this is a bunch of directions to say, how do you get into Boston Harbor? Coming from the sea at the night, bring the lighthouse to bear west and steer for it, observing your incline, I'm not going to read this all to you. But this is as important a geographic text as the map itself, and the two really form a pair. They form this incredible source of knowledge that the British Navy needed in order to achieve its military goals in the American Revolution. So it's interesting to us, not just as a document that shows what Boston was like, but also a document that shows what kind of institutions could produce and circulate geographic material like that. Now, this is another map that plays a kind of tricky, does a trick with time. I'll orient you here. This is on the right side of the map. Whoops. This is the public garden. All the way on the right here is Boston Common. Here's Boylston Street. So like Suffolk and the State House would be way off the right border of this map. Can anyone figure out where this Silver Lake is today with 1 mile in circumference and these kind of funny little tour boats in the middle of it? If that's the public garden, where's this Silver Lake? And north is up on this map, so.
Would it be the Charles?
It's close. The Charles is actually north of here, kind of off the top border of the map. This is a trick question, and any guesses why it might be a trick question?
Is it not there?
It's not only not there, it never was there. So this map is interesting if you read the title. It is a plan presented to the state commissioners for the improvement of the Back Bay. To remember in the last map, I showed you how Copley Square would have been off in the middle of those tidal flats in 1770s. Over the course of the 19th century, this map is from 1850, people made a bunch of plans about how to fill in all of those mudflats and turn them into land. And this map is a speculative plan that was never built quite the way that it's shown. And so it's a really good reminder of the things that we see on historic maps don't necessarily show actual history as it took place, right? If I use this map to say like, oh, there was once a silver lake here, about whatever, 1/8 of a mile to the west of the public garden, I'd be wrong because this map showed a world that was never built. But it did, the Back Bay, of course, did end up getting filled. We saw it on that 1899 map. It got built out with this gridded system of streets and became this elite residential neighborhood. One clue that I always tell people about Boston and its historical geography, if you're standing anywhere in Boston and there's like a right angle of streets, like a grid of streets, the kind that you might find in New York or Denver or anywhere in the West, you're probably on a part of Boston that didn't exist in the 1770s, because the colonial city was built on this European template of putting streets wherever they might go. And then these areas of landfill, like the Back Bay, were planned in this very rational, they plotted it out, sold the land in advance, divided it for sale, and that's where you get this gridded landscape like the one that we have in Copley Square. Now, we have another set of maps that we've done a bunch of digital transformations for that are really amazing resources for doing urban history at the micro scale in Boston. So what we're looking at in the middle of this is 1895. Here's Somerset Street, Ashburton Place. Do you all know where the Suffolk County Courthouse is on campus on Somerset Street? In the background is an 1874 map. And as I fade from one to the other, you can see what's different here. You can see some things that are the same. Here's the Mount Vernon Congregational Church. It's in exactly the same spot from the 1874 to 1895 map. How about the courthouse? What's there on 1874 that changes by the time we get to 1895? Can you tell what this courthouse was built on top of? It might be hard to see on my screen, but this is a block of houses. It's a block of residences. You can actually, if you zoom in, you can see all the names of the people who own these houses. Nathaniel Bowditch, R.M. Mason, a bunch of names here. And then you can see the change over time really dramatically when you're comparing one map to the other. The county came in, seized that block, pushed all the houses down, and built the courthouse. And just by comparing these two maps, you can tell, okay, that courthouse was built sometime between 1874 and 1895. This Atlas Scope tool is filled with almost actually 101 maps of Boston that help you compare it over time. Here's the State House, 1895. Well, we were talking about the shape of the State House in that first map. There's the State House in 1874. You can see that the whole backside, the northern wing of the State House, was actually a reservoir and another block of houses. And there were a handful of streets back here that got pushed away when the State House expanded north towards the end of the 19th century. So this Atlas Scope tool covers about 1860 to 1930 with these really, really detailed maps that you can zoom right in on and actually like see the names of who owns things and how those buildings were constructed. Here's the corner of Court Square and Court Street. There's the old courthouse, Young's Hotel. See the Sears building here. And you can see how it was changing over time. This is especially dramatic in parts of the city that were being constructed over the late 19th century. We're going to jump into the 20th century with this last map. This is another map that plays fast and loose with time. This is a planning map of the Fenway area. This is from a collection of maps from the BRA, which is the city's planning department throughout the most of the mid-20th century. And this map is interesting, again, when we think about the power of the map itself. So I showed you that one that the British Navy created. They didn't create the map just to have something pretty to look at it. They created that map because they wanted to sail warships into Boston Harbor. Similarly, this map is really beautiful in a way. It's got all these lovely colors and even some shadows for the tall buildings. But the BRA didn't make it just like for wallpaper. They made it because they were reshaping the form of the city in really dramatic ways in 1968 when this map was built. And so the ability to make a map like this and to show one's plans on it is an act of authority. The map itself carries a kind of power. The BRA at the time, along with the city and the state, were proposing a network of highways. You can see it here labeled the Inner Belt, this huge superhighway flyover pass coming into an area that's now Northeastern University. And that also was never built, partly because the power of maps to rearrange space like this, and the ability of the BRA to shape what would happen in the city, became a site of resistance for community activism, for people who said, hey, we don't want you to just like splash some colors on a map. We want you to think and work more carefully with communities. And that site of, or that act of resistance against the power of the map is actually the story that's told here. The map is an expression of what the government wanted to do, but was not able to do in the 1960s. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Professor Allison is gonna divide you into 3 groups, and you are going, each one of those groups, 1, 2, and 3, you'll see 3 links in the Notion document that I sent out. I'm going to give you all about 5 minutes to answer 3 questions, which are, what sort of person or institution did you think might have made this map? Then, without looking at the catalog record, because the catalog record will give it away, can you guess when this map was made and what clues tell you how to historicize it? And what about when it was showing? The time that it was made isn't necessarily the time that it shows. So I could make a map today in 2021 that shows Boston in 1899. And then finally, the most importantly, what's 1 or 2 questions about historical geography of Boston that the map opens up? So that doesn't have to be something that you can answer, but something that makes you curious about the city, something that makes you want to know more. So, Professor Allison, can you divide the group up?
Yes, I am dividing you into 3 groups. Now, do you have a choice for group 1, 2, and 3? Is that already set on the document they have?
Yeah, so will you get numbers with your groups? Yeah, so just follow the number that's that corresponds with the breakout room that you're in.
Okay, good. So we'll see you in the breakout rooms.
All right, see you in a sec.
Do something wrong here.
Do people have to choose their own? Or?
I thought I had it set automatically. Let me see. Okay. Oops.
I will confess I'm not a breakout room expert.
So. Okay, they've changed the formula on this. It used to be a lot easier. So let me just see if I can correct this. So far, Emma's the only one in a breakout room. So all the breakout rooms are going to close in 30 seconds, and then I will start again, and you can go into your breakout rooms and talk about Mr. Nelson and me not being able to monitor the technology. Okay, so let me see. Here we go. Now you've all been invited to join a breakout room.
Great, looks like they're filing in.
Good.
Cool.
And then you can actually go check in on them while they're in the.
Yeah, I
breakout
usually
room.
just let them, I
Yeah,
usually just
okay.
give them a few minutes and let
Okay,
them come back.
yeah.
I find that if I jump in, then I
Yeah.
stifle
Yeah.
them.
No, this is always interesting to see what you do with the maps, and we'll see what they get out of them too.
Yeah. Did you have any students last term use any of them in a project or a paper?
Remember, it's yeah, I think so. They did a blog post on Boston. I can't remember though if anyone did. I've just, I apologize. I tend to focus so much on what's happening now that but yeah, this is such a great way of introducing. I did have one student email me this afternoon saying how excited he was about the class because he loves maps.
Oh, cool. There's always at least one student that's just like jazzed about maps.
Yeah. And I like the one who pointed out the Ames building, which is now a Suffolk dorm.
Mhm.
That was the Ames. So that was the Ames Corporation's headquarters, and so it was one of the first skyscrapers in Boston.
I think I know the building.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I like the name and connecting it to Suffolk. The Suffolk campus is like just have this block of where it is, but nothing of what's inside of it.
Well, Suffolk just acquired it in the last year and redid. It was a hotel. It had been an office
it's
building.
that building.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
kind of an interesting time to acquire a dorm.
Yeah,
since then
did
everyone
they
was
buy
central.
it since the pandemic?
Well, it was in process.
It was in process.
And they were working on it when the pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm. So are all students back residential now at this point?
No.
Suffolk, no.
A small number, mainly freshmen, and so they wanted. So I have two classes that are mainly freshmen, and so they're both meeting on campus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You live in Southie? Where
we just moved to East Boston this past summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how are you? Are you driving in, or are you taking?
Well, my wife usually drives me in,
Yeah.
and it only takes about 10 minutes from here. It's
Yeah.
actually easier than from South Boston.
Yeah.
Where are you again?
I live in Melrose. We moved to Melrose
Okay,
over the summer, so I've been coming in very infrequently. We have some access to the library, but I find the hardest is just getting in.
Yeah.
I've taken the orange. We're right up near Oak Grove, so
yeah.
I've taken the Orange Line a few times, but I can't. It's hard to tell how risky that is.
It is, yeah. We live right next to the airport station, and so I have taken it home a couple of times. But, we say once things are back to normal, it'll be a lot more convenient.
Yeah, that's a great commute for you.
Yeah.
Will you be able to take the ferry when it's back running?
If there is one, I will take it.
Yeah.
I do that a lot when I go to the Charlestown Navy Yard. There's a boat that goes from Long Wharf to the Navy Yard.
Yeah. Should we give them a minute warning and start closing it out?
Sure.
I know we're running a little behind too, so. Yeah, it's been very hard for us to plan our next exhibitions without knowing when we're going to have a gallery.
Yeah.
But hopefully it won't be forever.
Yeah.
Does the Suffolk administration seem pleased with the way the return to in-person teaching is going?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, they did make plan. I mean, I have to say they did a good job of planning what they were going to do and reacting. Like in the spring semester of last year, they actually sent everyone home. Then they said they paid their way to wherever they wanted to go, and then just simply took up with online classes. We've been very slow to get to have online classes, so it was, so it's been interesting seeing how they have responded. So okay, I'll close the breakout rooms. 1 minute.
Is that everyone back? I can't remember how many there are. Seems like maybe there's one more group still waiting.
I think so. Let me check.
Yeah, I see
there
they're
they go.
coming now. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to start with group 1, and I'll share my screen so that we can all see what we're talking about here. Let's get it back. Okay, so group 1, tell us about this map. What do you think about it? Who do you think it came from? What does it show? And what questions does it make you ask?
Are we talking about the same map?
No,
This is the one group 1 looked at.
each group has a different map. So this is group.
Yeah, so we didn't know. We didn't see a map in our breakout room.
Oh, you were supposed to click. The links are all in the document.
Oh, so was this map, right? The one that you're showing on your screen?
If you're group 1, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then never mind.
Okay, well, I guess we're gonna do it all together right now.
Yeah. So at least I thought that this map looked like it was from the 1600s since it looks so old. And not terribly accurate and focus more on like terrain.
Great. What's some evidence that makes it look old and inaccurate?
Oh, the flags on the ship or something, right? On that, I don't know. Is that a ship?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's old because of the flag on that ship. That's my guess.
Yeah, it's not a recognizable flag. Can you tell what we're looking at? Any landmarks that we recognize?
Well, I just noticed it's Massachusetts, Cape Cod. It's totally like Native American, right?
So this is not a map that was produced by American Indians because we don't have very many.
Oh, I was just looking at like the Mohawk country and all the names.
So again, thinking about what was going on in New England in the 17th century.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but this is like probably around the 1640s, like right as England was starting to colonize New America. And because the crown's on this map, that means it was before Revolutionary America. So I would assume that this would be around the 1640s when they started in Jamestown, then they landed over here up in Boston and New England.
Right.
So yeah.
This is a map of the colonial encounter, right? And it reflects very much what the English settlers were concerned about. And so you see things like banks, fishing banks off the coast of Cape Cod. You see the beginnings of what were called plantations. Plymouth. This is early Boston. Remember that little peninsula, which was not actually the most important settlement at the time that this map was made. You're starting to see the division of Massachusetts into counties. Plymouth Colony is still not part of Massachusetts at this time, so you have different administrative geography. And then probably most importantly is the way that this map does recognize that there are other people living here. It does so in ways that reveal a lot about what the English thought was weird, like this turkey. The turkeys are native to North America, not Europe. So putting something like this, been like, what's this crazy bird? But more importantly, you see things like historical acts of genocide, battles between American Indians and white settlers. You see settlements moving up the Connecticut River here. Then you see these kind of exotic portraits of Indian peoples, Indian forts. This is a map that's kind of perched right on the edge of when New England becomes Englandized and becomes the colonial landscape that takes us through to the American Revolution. This is almost 100 years before the American Revolution, though.
Yeah.
So it's a reminder that American history doesn't start with the Revolutionary War. There's centuries of conflict and contact between Europeans and Native peoples before them. Okay, group 2. Did you all click this link and know that you were supposed to
Yeah,
look
we
at
got
it?
this one.
Great. Tell us what we see here.
What I first noticed is how there's like 3 sections, it looks like in the water with like, what does it say? Let me zoom back in. With the total square feet of what they want it to be, it's like they're planning to build a wharf in that area.
Great. Absolutely. You see some very like accurate engineering like numbers and diagrams. What kind of questions does this make you ask?
What we were thinking is who was building this and why they're building this, and we kind of decided that the state is building this for increase of trade, to have more ports for ships to come in.
Great. And you see some names, official sounding names, right? The US commissioners on Boston Harbor. You see some very like official, precise looking lines, perhaps even like connected to legal language, like Section 3. And we talked earlier about how Boston expanded its footprint into the Back Bay. This is Boston doing the same thing in a different part of Estuarine Flats. This is what's the seaport today. So this curve is still there, that's Fan Pier. Going out here, this is like where the ICA museum is. And this is now like one of Boston's most kind of gentrified, expensive, luxury development areas, all sitting on land that was plotted out. And who had the power to do this? The state government, the city government, the federal government all had to agree about where land would get created, who would do the filling, how it would get sold. They're creating property out of nothing, right? So who owns that property? Who gets to sell it? Who gets to use it? How do they deal with things like railroad lines that were already cutting across these salt flats? And those are questions, again, that are with us today, right? Like the property that was created here then became an industrial area, shipping facilities, wars. When Boston became a kind of post-industrial economy in the 1970s and beyond, those things became less important, leaving all these vacant lots and parking lots, which brings us right up to the last 10 or 20 years when the city decided to redevelop this area and turn it into luxury skyscrapers. A process that was very much set in motion by this map, the ability to trace out this new land and turn it into city. Okay, group 3. Did you all look at this map?
Yeah, we did.
Great. Tell us a little bit about it.
So what we thought was that it was made in the early 1900s because Boston's pretty developed already, and a lot of the areas around it are as well. Like you see towns like Medford, Arlington, you got Somerville, all the way up to Melrose and stuff like that. So we thought it was like made around then. We were a little iffy on who made the map or why it would be made. I kind of thought it was like sort of a commemorative map because there's like some artistic features, like you can see there's like a little head in the like the Bay Area blowing on East Boston. And then there's some ships around, and a lot of, it details a lot of the like kind of sights to see rather than like where buildings are specifically. So I think it was kind of maybe a little bit more of a piece of art. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. And, you know, thinking also about like what this map can't do, right? Like probably not a particularly useful map if you wanted to drive around the city, right? Like there's some roads that are shown, but it's not like a super accurate rail map. Instead, the cartographers put a ton of effort into all these little pictures, these raised perspective things like South Station, there's Faneuil Hall, North Station, and all the way up through the area. And you nailed it. This is a 20th century map. We use the term pictorial to refer to maps like these that use things like illustrations and images to refer to areas. And it's a commemorative map. It's a map that would have been sold as a poster or to put on somebody's wall, to stand in as a kind of souvenir for the whole metropolitan area. That interestingly, like the cartographer chooses to show all of these places as part of Boston, not only the city, which is shaded in yellow, but the suburban cities and towns that are by the 20th century very closely connected to it culturally, economically, through transport links like roads and railroads. I know we are just about at the hour. So where I'm going to leave you is in the document that I shared with you, I have a couple of links, which I'm not going to show live, but that are all resources for you to use as you go about your own research projects, as you explore the city, as you think about how it's changed historically. And I would encourage you to think about and look at those documents, not just as like, oh, I put in the word Dorchester because I'm doing a project on Dorchester, but instead to think about them as objects that open up questions and ideas about how to think about the city and its changes. We have a big digital collections repository with like about 10,000 maps in it. I've linked there to the Atlascope project for you, which is really great for exploring Boston's small scale urban history. And then a few other ways to find collections at other institutions beyond just the Map Center. So I'm going to leave it there.
Great.
I know we're pretty much out of time, but any questions?
So your maps are available, even though the library is closed, people can access them through the Leventhal website?
Yeah, so most of our best maps are digitized. There's a couple of, well, there's lots of exceptions. We have about 250,000 maps in the collection, and we don't have 250,000 maps online. A lot of 20th century stuff is not digitized because it's under copyright. So we can only put up things that don't have copyright. We also can't digitize things that are really fragile or brittle or difficult to put under a camera. And so the best way to find material, which is true not only in our library, but in your Suffolk University libraries or any library, is to remember that there are humans behind libraries. They can help you find things. They can help you find the stuff that's very difficult to come across just by typing into a box and assuming that that box will give you the answers that you need. So our research services are free. Your Suffolk University librarians can help you as well. Start early, start looking and exploring and discovering and letting serendipity guide you. And then as you kind of think about more deep questions that need specific resources, that's a great time to rely on the help of a librarian.
And did you have a link to that feature where you can look at overlaid maps? Did you have a link to that in the document you gave us?
Yep, so that's the second resource I included there. That's our Atlascope portal. That's a really fun way to explore maps in kind of a different setting, or a way that like allows you to compare them across time.
Do you have a favorite map?
Oh, I have so many. I always say I have a sort of like white whale map. There's this amazing bird's eye view of Boston from I think 1904 that we don't have. It's at the Library of Congress, or I should actually say there's a record that the library did purchase it in the early 20th century, but nobody knows where it is. So
wow.
My dream is that I'll be like in a dark alley, a dark corridor of the library and come across it someday.
Oh, wow, good. Okay, well, are there any other questions for Mr. Nelson? Well, then thank you, Garrett. This was fun.
Yeah, please reach out to our research staff for questions. Browse our digital collections, tweet or Instagram us if you find something cool. We love to know how people are using the materials and how they inspire you.
Great, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you all, and best of luck with the rest of your term.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll see everyone on Thursday.
All right. Thanks, Professor Allison.
Take care.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor, have a good day.
Take care, you
Have a
too.
good night.
You too.